In 1997, Isuzu began building an SUV that had absolutely no business existing. It looked like nothing else on the road. A two-door, plastic-clad, alien-looking thing with a spare tire bolted to the rear hatch and fender flares that seemed to have been designed by someone whose entire design philosophy comes from looking at Hot Wheels cars. Underneath the strange bodywork was a torque-on-demand four-wheel drive system developed with Borg-Warner, leather-trimmed Recaro racing seats, and a 215 horsepower 3.5-liter V6 with direct injection, a technology almost unheard of in off-road vehicles at the time. Then in 2001, it introduced a new SUV with unique styling but a familiar feel to its predecessors, along with an old friend to spread the word to the masses. This is a brief look at Isuzu, their V-Cross and Axiom SUVs, and of course, Joe Isuzu, the fake, but not really fake, spokesman who became more popular than the cars he was promoting. A glimpse into the company which spent 3 decades building a reputation in America, only to walk away from the passenger vehicle market entirely. Isuzu's presence in the United States began quietly, through a partnership that would define and ultimately consume the brand. In 1971, General Motors purchased a 34% stake in the Japanese manufacturer. The following year, GM began importing a small pickup truck from Isuzu and selling it through Chevrolet dealerships as the LUV, an acronym for Light Utility Vehicle. For nearly a decade, Isuzu existed in America only as a supplier. The name was unknown to customers who bought its trucks as they were sold with Chevrolet badges on the grille. That changed in 1981 when the company began selling vehicles under the Isuzu name. The first was the Pup, a compact pickup that was essentially the successor to the LUV, just now wearing an Isuzu badge. The early 1980s were promising. Isuzu launched the Trooper, a mid-size SUV that found a loyal audience among buyers who wanted genuine off-road capability without the bulk of an American truck. The Impulse, a sporty coupe designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro, arrived in 1983. By the end of the decade, there was even an all-wheel drive turbocharged version, the Impulse RS, which wore badges that read "Handling by Lotus" because the legendary British chassis engineers had tuned its suspension. The 1980s were a time where Isuzu was, quietly and steadily, building something real in America. Enter Joe Isuzu. In 1986, Isuzu hired the advertising agency Della Famiglia Travisano and Partners to boost the brand's profile in the United States. The agency's answer was a fictional spokesman, a slick, smiling car salesman named Joe Isuzu, played by a struggling actor named David Leisure. The premise was simple, and at the time, completely novel. Joe Isuzu would stand in front of an Isuzu vehicle and lie. He'd claim a base model iMark cost $9, which, as on-screen subtitles would immediately clarify, was the cost of the ashtray. He'd say an Isuzu Trooper could seat 15 passengers. The subtitles would note that it seated 5. He'd promise a pickup truck was faster than a Porsche 911. Every claim corrected in real time by text at the bottom of the screen. The campaign was a sensation. Joe Isuzu became a cultural phenomenon. David Leisure appeared on talk shows, the ads were discussed at water coolers, and Advertising Age would eventually rank Joe Isuzu among the top 100 advertising campaigns of the 20th century. But there was a catch. The campaign was so effective that it created a strange problem. People remembered Joe Isuzu. They did not remember the cars. The Pitchman had become larger than the product, a walking piece of performance art that entertained viewers without, it turned out, actually selling very many vehicles. The campaign was ended in 1990. Joe Isuzu went away, and Isuzu, having spent 4 years making America laugh, was left without the question of what, exactly, it was supposed to be building. That answer would arrive at the 1993 Tokyo Auto Show. At the 1993 Tokyo Auto Show, Isuzu unveiled a concept vehicle that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never seen any other production SUV that had been brought to market. It was a two-door, short wheelbase off-roader with a face like a deep-sea creature, massive plastic over fenders, and proportions that defied every convention of automotive design. That vehicle was the Isuzu V-Cross. The reaction was so strong that Isuzu made a decision almost no manufacturer makes. It announced it would put the concept car into production almost exactly as shown. The problem was that building a car with curves this radical required tooling that didn't exist. Traditional steel stamping dies, the enormous metal forms that press body panels out of sheet steel, cost millions of dollars and take months to manufacture. Isuzu couldn't justify that kind of investment for what was always intended to be a low-volume image-building vehicle. The solution was ceramics. Isuzu developed a proprietary process using ceramic stamping dies instead of steel. Significantly cheaper to produce, but far less durable. A steel die might last for hundreds of thousands of stampings. A ceramic die would wear out after a few thousand. In other words, The V-Across was built using tooling that had a relatively quick expiration date. This meant that the production run was capped from the moment that the first die was machined. Isuzu knew, before a single unit was sold, that the V-Across would never be built in large numbers. What they built was, by any engineering standard, extraordinary. The chassis was borrowed from the Trooper, but shortened and stiffened. The suspension was fully independent, front and rear, almost unheard of for a serious off-roader in 1997. The four-wheel drive system was a Borg-Warner-developed torque-on-demand setup that could send power to the front wheels automatically when it detected slip, making it equally capable on wet pavement and rutted trails. Inside, the V-Across featured deeply bolstered Recaro seats, a leather-wrapped steering wheel, and funky red accents on the seating. The engine was a 3.5-liter dual-overhead cam V6 producing 215 horsepower and 230 pound-feet of torque. Not enormous numbers, but the V-Across weighed just under 4,000 pounds, and the power delivery, combined with the torque-on-demand system, made it genuinely quick for a truck of its size. The original MSRP started at $29,595 for the 1999 model and crept just over $31,000 by 2001. Car and Driver called it the Miata of SUVs. It was the kind of vehicle that automotive magazines put on their covers and enthusiasts added to their dream garage lists. It sold 4,153 units in the United States over 3 model years. But while Isuzu was building the most advanced SUV of the decade, the company around it was quietly coming apart. The V-Across was launched into a company that on paper was at the top of its game. In 1999, Isuzu sold 127,630 vehicles in the United States, the highest annual total in the brand's American history. But underneath those numbers, the foundation was cracking. In 1996, Consumer Reports gave the Isuzu Trooper and its badge-engineered twin, the Acura SLX, a not acceptable rating after tests showed the vehicles could tip up on 2 wheels during emergency avoidance maneuvers. The magazine called for a recall. Isuzu sued the publication, alleging the tests were rigged, and a federal court ordered a trial, which Isuzu ultimately lost. The damage to the brand's reputation was done, and Isuzu was in trouble. Meanwhile, General Motors had been steadily increasing its control in the brand. In 1998, GM raised its stake in Isuzu to 49%, up from 34%. With near majority ownership came influence, product planning, platform sharing, and Isuzu's identity in the American market all fell into the control of Isuzu's GM overlords. The rebadging accelerated. Building on the existing relationship with Honda, GM started including several Isuzu models with the Japanese manufacturer. The Rodeo became the Honda Passport and the Trooper became the Acura SLX. In the other direction, Isuzu dealers received the Oasis, a rebadged Honda Odyssey minivan, a vehicle which was so far from Isuzu's truck and SUV core DNA that it was hard to imagine who it was actually meant for. Then in 2002, GM cut its stake from 49% to just 12%. It had taken what it needed and was ready to move on. In 2001, nearly a decade after the original campaign ended, Isuzu made a decision that was equal parts nostalgia and desperation. They brought Joe Isuzu back. The return of the fictional spokesman, can you actually really call them fictional if they were actually the face of your product, coincided with the upcoming launch of a new vehicle, the Axiom. The Axiom was a mid-sized SUV that Isuzu had developed largely in-house. It featured sharp, angular styling from a design studio in California, a 230 horsepower version of their 3.5-liter V6 with direct injection. David Leisure returned as Joe Isuzu, now a decade older, still lying with a straight face. The Axiom was rapidly brought to market, debuting as the ZXS concept at the Tokyo Auto Show in 1999 and then as the Axiom at the 2000 New York Auto Show. The production-ready version was then presented at the Detroit Auto Show in January of 2001. Cars started hitting dealer lots in April 2001 as 2002 model years. The quick development cycle was due to the commonality it shared with its siblings, the Rodeo and the Trooper. The bodywork may have been unique to the Axiom, but the underpinnings were generally taken from the parts bin. The name Axiom was not crafted by the marketing team, but rather submitted by a potential customer. Isuzu had set up a website prior to the vehicle being launched that asked people to submit names that they thought would be a good fit for the vehicle. Electrical engineer Hakan Ure submitted the name Axiom, which is defined as a foundational statement or principle accepted as true without proof. Isuzu liked this name over the other 47,000 submissions and chose it for the production model. But the Axiom was entering into an SUV market that was saturated with competitors such as Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Ford, and Chevrolet, all of whom had more dealerships, bigger marketing budgets, and fresher product lines. By August 2001, only 2,775 Axioms had been sold. The Axiom lasted just 3 model years, and Isuzu ultimately discontinued it after the 2004 model year. By then, Isuzu showrooms had become unrecognizable. After the Axiom's failure, Isuzu's American passenger vehicle division entered what can only be described as a managed surrender. The Ascender, introduced in 2004, was not an Isuzu product. It was a GMC Envoy with an Isuzu grille, literally the same vehicle built on the same GMT 360 platform, rolling off the same assembly line. The I-Series pickup, introduced the same year, was just a rebadged Chevy Colorado. Isuzu's commercial truck division still sold its own products, the NPR and NQR cabover trucks that had dominated their segments for years. But the passenger vehicle side of the business had been reduced to selling General Motors trucks with different badges, at higher prices, through fewer dealerships. This brilliant business strategy is a great way to achieve sales figures that look like this. In 1999, Isuzu sold 127,630 vehicles in the United States. By 2005, that number was down to 12,177. In 2006, it was 8,614. And in 2007, the final full year of passenger vehicle availability under the Isuzu brand had total sales of 7,098 vehicles. The company had lost 94% of its American volume in 7 years. In 2006, GM sold its remaining stake in Isuzu entirely. The partnership that had launched Isuzu's American journey in 1972 had come to a close. On January 31, 2009, Isuzu Motors America discontinued all passenger vehicle sales in the United States. The last vehicles sold were the Ascender and the I-Series, both of them, by that point, nothing more than GM products wearing a borrowed name. The Isuzu Via Cross was never meant to sell in volume. The ceramic dies guaranteed that. But the Via Cross had outlasted everything else Isuzu built for American consumers. Today, surviving examples have quietly appreciated in value. The average sale price for a used Via Cross hovers around $10,800, but well-maintained, low-mileage examples can go for far more than this. Enthusiast forums track every known surviving vehicle. Owners gather at off-road events, their cars instantly recognizable among a sea of Wranglers and 4Runners, a cult following for an SUV that most people don't even know ever existed. The Joe Isuzu ad campaign is still taught in advertising courses as a case study in the risks of making a Pitchman more famous than the product. Joe Isuzu was brilliant, memorable, and genuinely funny, but he couldn't sell enough cars to save the company that created him. Isuzu itself didn't disappear from American roads. The commercial truck division, the one that had been quietly profitable since 1984, continues to operate. Isuzu still sells Class 3 through 6 trucks through its dealer network, still holds the title of the #1 selling low-cab forward truck brand in America, and recently announced plans for a new assembly plant in Greenville, South Carolina. The company survived, it just stopped making consumer vehicles. The story of Isuzu in America is not a story of failure, it's a story of identity, of a company that built an extraordinary reputation for manufacturing trucks people trusted, then spent 2 decades trying to figure out what else it could be. The Via Cross was the most honest answer to that question, a machine built without compromise, using tooling designed to self-destruct, for an audience that was never going to be large enough to sustain the brand, without a clear answer to what would come next. Sometimes the most interesting product in the room isn't the one that sells or saves the brand.